Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Stephen Smith did his little podcast yesterday. I know that practically none of you bothered to listen to it because we all knew it wouldn't be about nothing. Talk about an hour of my life that I'll never get back. But we got to address it for the same reason you have to address a mosquito. It may not be able to kill you, but it's annoying and you don't want them trying to live off your blood either. Anyway, Smith's promise to challenge the black podcasters who dared to call him out was more sizzle than steak, though he did make sure to tell everyone that he wasn't necessarily defending Jerry Jones.
Now, I made news earlier last week, and certainly people didn't accord me that luxury. Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, is somebody I purportedly came to the defense of. I didn't view it that way, but if y'all want to label it that way, so be it.
Hear that? He wasn't defending Jerry Jones, but then he proceeded to waste the next 52 minutes defending Jerry Jones. And notice how he keeps trying to have it both ways. I didn't view it that way, he said. And then he immediately followed that with, if y'all want to label it that way, then so be it. Now, why would you want to allow people to claim you did something you didn't do? Well, if Smith says that we can label it as a defense if we want, good, because we will, because that's what he did. Now, obviously, I'm not going to refute him point by point because, to be honest, he didn't really have a point. It was just a regurgitation of the same stale nonsense he's always been spouting. Like I said, he's just clout chasing, trying to bring traffic to his podcast. On the podcast homepage, he actually gives a synopsis of this drivel where he claims to rail against groupthink. Whenever you hear some bootlick whining about black groupthink, they're always complaining about the black community calling out racism. That's when they use that word. Or some fool who's acting as an apologist for racism wants to try to get people off his back. The groupthink talking point that the Stephen Smiths and other professional butt kissers use is always trotted out when the black community is standing up for itself and standing for justice and basic human dignity. Smith shamelessly uses the exact same anti-black talking point that's spouted by both the white right and the white left to try to say that black people are just one big nigger is what that means. See, all of us are just a bunch of mindless zombies because we think that racism should be called racism. That people who are acting as apologists for anti-black racism should be called what they are. And that both the racist and the people who knowingly run interference for them ought to be told that they're both wrong. The people who Stephen Smith is protecting are also the same people who he depends upon for his livelihood, which explains why you've never seen him call for an NFL or NBA team owner to be thrown out of their respective leagues until he first puts his finger to the wind and sees what the prevailing white media opinion will be. Stephen Smith and that kindergarten he calls a network are the ones who practice the strictest type of groupthink. Do you see anyone on ESPN or Fox Sports or CBS News or anywhere else who says Jerry Jones is a racist and should be driven out of the league? None of them do. You will never hear the viewpoint of the black grassroots being reflected on Stephen Smith's show or any of these white media outlets.
Is it plausible to believe that he was one of the people trying to prevent the school from being desegregated? Sure, but do we know? We do not. Did we see him throw at anybody? Did we see him spit at anybody? Did we see him commit any kind of vile act? No. And because I had the temerity and the unmitigated gall to point that out, I'm a sellout. That is exactly the problem with our community. Talking to the black community. White people, you want to turn podcasts off? Go ahead and do that. I'm talking to black people. You can listen if you want to, but I'm talking to black people.
No, Stephen, what's wrong with the community is you. Of course, we all know that when you say what's wrong with the community, what you mean is what's wrong with all these black people who dare to call you out on your foolishness. How wrong of them. To you, that's what's wrong with the black community, that black people actually dare to question you. But the truth is, what's wrong with the black community is you and others like you. When we left the plantations, we allowed turncoats like you to leave with us. Oh, wait, your folks are immigrants, Stephen. You can't trace your lineage back to the killing fields of the American South. So you were never there with us, and neither were any of your ancestors, which explains why you can maintain your distance to this day without a pang of remorse. The problem in the black community is that white power put bootlicks like you on the payroll, and then uses its white media monopoly to make hand-picked puppets like yourself prominent, and then you run interference for white power full-time. That's what's wrong with the black community. We have all these Negroes who are off code and attacking the black community morning, noon, and night because they know that white power will feed them the next day. So as they see it, there's no real consequences for acting against the interests of the community. We're being undermined from within by forces outside the community, and backstabbers like you, Stephen Smith, are collaborating with those forces. That's what's wrong with the community. People like yourself, who will do anything, say anything to keep in the good graces of those same outside forces who you depend upon for every crumb of your daily bread. Keep in mind, this is the exact same Stephen Smith who a year ago went on Tamron Hall's show and said this.
Decade ago, I was completely unemployed, living off of my savings, literally living off of my savings. And I had just become a father, so I was wondering what on earth was going to happen to my life, my career, whatever.
Had you played the game wrong?
Totally.
By
I got
what?
something very simple to tell you that I figured out that I think will work for anybody in the world of corporate America and beyond. I wake up every day with two missions in mind. How do I make my bosses more money? And how do I get some of it? Very simple. Why is that? Because if you wake up with that mindset, number one, the boss wants to hear what you have to say because they know that you're putting them first. And then they don't resent you trying to get some of it yourself.
Spoken like a true bootlicking slave. And he tries to make that sound like it's supposed to be some sort of boss move when it's not. Because when you're a boss, the only pockets you ever think about lining are your own. That's called autonomy. When a boss gets up every morning, the only thing he's thinking about is becoming Businessman of the Year. However, if you follow Stephen Smith's advice, the best you can hope for in life is to be Employee of the Month. Now that's good enough for him, obviously, but the question is, should that be good enough for you? This is someone begging to keep their job is what this is. Master, all I thinks about is you. Please don't send me out into the cold. I ain't got no job skills now. How pathetic. But this is who Stephen Smith is. There's no bottom to his bootlicking. There's no limit to the amount of deflection and denials that he's willing to engage in. There is no act, no statement of subservience or debasement that is too low for him to commit. Well, he certainly chose the right show to go on to say something like that, Tamron Hall. Talk about the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, I might talk about your game. I might talk about an act that you committed. But what I never do is engage in character assassination and believe that I have a license to use whatever moment I want to use to define who you actually are. I don't do that. But I'm not going to go off an incident and try to castigate you and demonize you and what have you. That's just not my MO.
Well, good thing Stephen Smith started off his podcast with a disclaimer that he wasn't necessarily defending Jerry Jones, because if he hadn't said that, I would have thought that this was a defense of Jerry Jones. Smith says that he would never extract a single moment from someone's life and then say that that one moment defines them. Well, that's the entire problem with Jerry Jones. It's precisely the fact that he's been accused of racism for so long that makes it where the photo is automatic condemnation, because we know that that 14-year-old racist who was menacing those black students wasn't having just one immature, callous moment. We have watched Jones for decades, and we know this is who he is. And that photo is just another piece of evidence in a never-ending lifelong string of proof that he has been a hardcore racist since before he was old enough to legally drive. The photo did not surprise anyone, it disgusted us, mainly because we knew that this is exactly who and what Jerry Jones is. Jones's behavior is under scrutiny yet again because that 1957 photo is part of an uninterrupted continuum of racially hostile behavior on his part. It wasn't just a moment, and Smith knows it. And if merely mentioning someone's behavior makes Smith think that that person's being demonized, then what you ought to be asking is why that person keeps engaging in so much devilish behavior.
Because what you missed in my diatribe in defense of Jerry Jones was the bigger message that I was saying, which is, do we really want to open the Pandora's box where a picture can be pulled from 57 years ago to use as impetus and motivation to castigate, castrate, demonize, and characterize another human being? We really want to do that? We really want to do that?
Did he just say that his diatribe was in defense of Jerry Jones?
Because what you missed in my diatribe in defense of Jerry Jones was the bigger message that I was saying.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Just checking. As usual, as with all these bootlicks, Smith tries to do the con game of how he was making a rhetorical chess move. That's what he tries to play it off as. I think we all know that the people who claim that they're doing chess moves are just pushing a load of bull. He says that the larger message was that nobody wants an environment where a single photo can be used to define them. Well, that happens with black people every single day. That's exactly what happened with Ray Rice. His life was destroyed over a video, and the same white media, people like Stephen Smith, who he works for, the same NFL team owners like Jerry Jones, wanted Ray Rice out of the league over a video. They didn't care what was going on. When his fiancée or whoever she was admitted that she attacked him, that didn't matter. Did Stephen Smith get profane about that? Did he cuss and carry on and say that the white media and white NFL owners were creating an environment of reckless hostility over a video? You can't judge a man based on a single moment? Nope. So that box has been open for the longest time. The only difference is who's having the dirty end of the stick pointed at them. And bootlicks like Stephen Smith are trying to head that off now. He's not concerned about people's lives being taken out of context or a single moment being used to define them. He's rushing to the rescue to make sure that it doesn't define certain people.
We're the only group of people who questions somebody else's ethnicity when we disagree with each other. If somebody else does it, I apologize. I just don't know about it. Never heard about it. I don't hear Jewish folks accusing folks of being non-Jewish because they disagree. I hear them not liking each other's views. I don't hear them questioning their Jewish authenticity. I don't hear white people saying, you ain't white no more. I don't hear Latinos saying, you ain't Latino no more. I don't hear that. If I'm wrong, I apologize.
Gee, what does Stephen Smith think that these white supremacists mean whenever they call another white person a nigger lover? I suppose Stephen Smith has never heard the expression, once you go black, you can't come back. White Society came up with that one. Oh yeah, you go over there with those black folks, you stay over there with them. You can't come back. Once you go black, you never go back. You can't be coming back to white society. These white supremacists have invented entire lexicons of terms and phrases that they use in order to disparage and denigrate white people who they feel have thrown away or otherwise discounted their whiteness. In the Asian American community, they have an expression that they call a banana. That's somebody who's an Asian American that's yellow on the outside but white on the inside. And among the Native American community, they'll call theirs apples. You know, red on the outside but white on the inside. But apparently Stephen Smith doesn't know about that, because Stephen Smith doesn't pay attention to anything. But that's an expression of self-hate on Stephen Smith's part. Sitting here saying, we the only community who does this, as if there's something uniquely wrong with black people. Oh yeah, that's that bootleg gene kicking in hard. He's sitting here with this white supremacist trope that there's just something uniquely wrong with black people. That's right up there with black people commit all the crime in America. Another lie. But here he is boldly pushing the lie that there's just something uniquely wrong with black people. There's just something wrong with us. Because that kind of sentiment sounds exactly like the kind of thing I would expect to hear from a sellout, but Stephen Smith's not a sellout. He said so.
I don't hear white people saying, you ain't white no more. I don't hear Latinos saying, you ain't Latino no more.
This is just the insecurity talking. Nobody's saying that Stephen Smith is not part of the black community anymore. Nobody says that. What we've said is Stephen Smith was never part of the black community to begin with. He's a community of one.
Since we want to call him out because he's an owner that hasn't hired a black coach, Atlanta Falcons haven't hired a black coach. The Jacksonville Jaguars haven't hired a black coach. The Los Angeles Rams, prior to that, the St. Louis Rams, they haven't hired a black coach. The New England Patriots and Mr. Robert Kraft haven't hired a black coach. The New Orleans Saints haven't hired a black coach. Neither has the Tennessee Titans, who were once the Houston Oilers. We talking about them? Of course we're not. You know why we're not talking about them? Because Jerry Jones has power and Jerry Jones has impact and they're America's team, but look at what he's doing.
And Smith also gave another pathetic defense of Jones, who he has not been defending, by the way, because Jones has been called out for not hiring a black coach. And Smith's retort was to say that a number of NFL teams have never hired a black head coach. And he says it as if nobody else has called these other teams out. Oh, everybody's just singling poor old Jerry Jones out. Oh, woe is he. This is a straw man argument. Smith claims nobody's talking about these other NFL teams. That's not true at all. However, Jerry Jones does call the Cowboys America's team. Maybe that's the reason why he gets such scrutiny. because he's been the most blatant and the most out front about his business practices, and he's been the most strident and arrogant about it. Now, if you're going to call your team America's team, you can't complain when people point out that the team doesn't look like America. And the reason that Jones seems to get called out more than everyone else is because he has made it a point over the decades to show his wrinkled racist behind every chance he gets. By the way, Smith mentioned in passing how Jones said that he would bench any players who refused to stand up for the national anthem, and then how Jones went back on that stance and actually took a knee with them one time. And this goes to show that Smith simply does not want to see that his defenses of Jones keep running into Jones's long-standing history of anti-black racism. Stephen Smith contradicts himself with his defenses that he doesn't want to be called defenses. But that's to be expected. Bootlicking isn't about logic or truth any more than fortune-telling is.
I come from a place where I want to hear everybody. I'm edified by the intelligence and the intellect and the civility of people from our community. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, my brother. Mark Lamont Hill, he and I go back a long ways. A plethora of people in the black community, historians, activists, entrepreneurs. I know the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I know Reverend Al Sharpton. I don't give a damn what people say about them. I know what they've tried to do for us. Don't have to agree with everything. But you'll never hear me denigrate them.
I think that this was the coup de grace of his little podcast temper tantrum. He actually did a bootlick roll call. Michael Eric Dyson, Mark Lamont Hill, Al Sharpton, Messy Jesse. It was like a monster movie marathon, just villain after villain. And he was saying these names like we were supposed to salute or something. Like this is supposed to refute how people see Stephen Smith, and it's supposed to establish for all of us that he's not some white media butt kisser. He names a bunch of other white media shills who are also in the tank. All of them trying to get time on a cable TV show or selling a book or what have you. People who get as little respect from the community as he does. But for Stephen Smith, this was supposed to build confidence with us when all it did was make him guilty by association.
Y'all want to attack everybody when we listen to one another. I'm not friends with Candace Owens. I've never met her a day in my life. But if you disagree with something she said, tell us what it is and why, rather than saying she a sellout.
So yeah, he's sticking up for Candace Owens of all people. But then again, both of them happen to be the descendants of immigrants. And for those people who thought to themselves that he didn't have a camaraderie with her, there it goes. Candace Owens' record of self-hating and anti-black gibberish is so well established there's no need to have to recount it. And yet Stephen Smith has the nerve to say, you're going to be calling Candace Owens a sellout but can't even say why. That's what he tries to say. And that kind of talk is the same thing as saying that she has a point. He had the nerve to say that we call Candace Owens a sellout but we can't say why. That's the kind of denial of reality that you get from Fox News. People who have already shown that you're wrong 5 ways from Sunday, people who bring the receipts, the invoices, and everything else, you turn around and say, well, you haven't proven your point. People have given Candace Owens' record of butt-kissing and lying for white power chapter and verse. She makes an easy target of herself because she goes so far overboard to be as extreme with her bootlicking as possible. As ridiculous as Candace Owens is with her con game, it would almost be entertaining, except for the fact that Candace Owens herself is about as interesting as watching paint dry. But this is who Stephen Smith chooses to lionize, or to otherwise take the side of, these chumps who we excoriate daily. He's calling them his brothers and praising them and saying, you'll never hear me denigrate them. We know you won't, Stephen. You bootlicks have to stick together and all that, at least until White Daddy throws one of you overboard, and then you bootlicks are too scared to even say boo. These bootlicks see themselves as special because white media puts them on TV, or gives them a book deal, or allows them to teach at a university. They think this makes them some sort of Negro elite. You know, I distinctly remember Tiffany Cross being the exact same way. And when I hear Stephen Smith trying to stick up for himself and claim that he's somehow for the community, he sounds exactly like Jalen Rose when that clown said, "I'd do more for the culture before 9 a.m. than most of y'all do in a lifetime." I swear these bootlicks ought to be writing fiction the way they come up with these fairy tales. These chumps have this entire imaginary world that they live in, and then they have to come out here to the real big bad world and face us. Jalen Rose hasn't done anything for anyone other than Jalen Rose. but apparently he thinks that getting out of bed in the morning is doing something for the culture. Hell, we already know that when Stephen Smith drags himself out of bed in the morning, the only thing he's thinking about is how to make his white paymasters more money. That's what he does before 9 a.m. Oh, but he does it for the culture, right?
Selling out? Selling out? I'm looking out. I'm looking out.
Yeah, Stephen, you're looking out all right. Looking out only for yourself. Like all bootlicks, Stephen Smith has to kiss the butts of the Jerry Jones of the world, because without them, he wouldn't exist. Instead of whining and pretending to be a victim, he ought to look at his behavior and then change that behavior. But as I've always taught you, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. Running interference for anti-black racism and sticking up for the anti-black racists is not some victimless crime. Denying the part that you play in supporting white supremacy may help you sleep at night, Stephen, but it doesn't change what you are. But of course, Stephen Smith saved the worst for last. This was his closer.
Because see, people who ain't getting caught up in emotions and being a divisive force within their own community are propelling. We might have some folks from the white community that are scared about the way our society is today, and they think that they desperately need to grab and hold on to a time that once was. But the vast majority of folks in the United States of America ain't thinking like that. They're marching forward, living their best life, trying to strive and succeed.
This level of denial of reality is right up there with Barack Obama's 2004 DNC keynote address. You know, the one where he infamously said, "There is no black America, there is no white America, only the United States of America." But Smith's not trying to put forward any sort of logical arguments with his podcast. What he's trying to do is to score points with whatever white executives that he hopes are listening. Any Negro who you hear spouting that colorblind post-racial gibberish, that's just some black person looking for a white audience. People like Skip Gates, who has spent his life living off of white money, either from the government or some white university or white network. You see, black people who are doing that, they know they have to deny reality, or it would make their masters, financiers, uncomfortable. Finally, Stephen Smith, who isn't defending Jerry Jones, mind you, ends his podcast by, defending Jerry Jones again.
And for the record, as it pertains to Jerry Jones, one last time, I had somebody ask me, I'm not going to tell y'all who it was, but they're well known. I do not agree with your defense of Jerry Jones. I know you don't mind, but you think he was there just to watch? How many black coaches has he hired? His equity work is what? I want to be educated. What has he done since to stem the tide of racism and exclusion? I could point to an inordinate amount of black athletes who've played for him, who swear by him, and black coaches, may not be head coaches, but black coaches who coach under him. But I won't go there. Instead, I'll ask a somewhat rhetorical but very provocative question to you all. Is that his obligation? His job is to make money and to pay players who play for him and coaches who coach for him.
He asks, is Jerry Jones obligated to stem the tide of racism and exclusion? Now, I could point to how the NFL has been putting out a steady stream of statements after statement talking about how they care about diversity and inclusion. I could do that. But the question that Smith should have asked is Jerry Jones obligated to demand players stand up for the national anthem? Is that what he hired them to do? Because that's what he acts like. If they stand for the national anthem, then I guess it doesn't matter whether they win or lose a game, right? Should the players demand bonuses for how many times they stand for the anthem? If Jones wants to make that a sticking point, then they should leverage a more lucrative contract for it. He shouldn't get it for free. That is, if we use Stephen Smith's logic, right? Jerry Jones acts as if he's obligated to be a blatant open racist, and he acts like it's still 1957. Is he obligated to hire only white head coaches? Because that's what he's been doing. See, that's something Stephen Smith should have asked, but didn't, and we all know why. But a better question would have been, is the NFL obligated to have Jerry Jones in it? Is there some law that says he has a right to own an NFL franchise? Is the NFL obligated to let Jerry Jones be a part of it? But Smith wouldn't dare ask a question like that, because to ask that kind of a question would be to raise the issue of whether these old, decrepit white supremacists are necessary. and he's never going to say that they aren't. But regardless of his deflections and denials and feeble attempts to play the victim, you know that this got under his paper-thin skin. Smith is still bootlicking. He's failed to fool anyone. All these decades, all the money the white media has paid him, and he knows that nobody looks at him with anything other than contempt or derision. Nobody takes Stephen Smith seriously. Stephen Smith has the mentality of an old skank. He thinks to himself that as long as he's able to get some loser to give him a couple of pennies, well, he's still got it. That's how he sees it. Long as ESPN or some other white media outlet still lets him draw a check off of them, he'll keep putting on the tap dance shoes and telling them how grateful he is and how all he thinks about is making massa money. You see, somebody recognized a long time ago that this guy doesn't have any real skills. And that's what you do when you got somebody who's basically going to be a charity case. You teach them that they need to get in the good graces of whomever their would-be patron is and get them to take care of you, like a pet. It's degrading, but in Stephen Smith's mind, he's winning, or at least that's what he tries to tell himself. But this rant shows the truth. He knows exactly what he is and how he's seen. So that's the broad strokes of Smith's promised checking of the black podcasters, which was not a defense of Jerry Jones, mind you. And as you see, he didn't have much to say. He gave the totally predictable denials of his own duplicity and treachery. He used straw man arguments, logical fallacies, and shaming tactics. He pretended that his critics didn't have an argument when in reality, he didn't have a defense. He knows how people see him, and it eats at him. It should. The black podcasters that he took issue with, we represent the truth, the way the world is. Stephen Smith represents a fantasy colorblind society that only exists in the white media offices where they only want one Negro on the payroll so that they can get them to tell them that racism doesn't exist. Well, the white media can hand Stephen Smith a platform, but no matter how many shows he's been on, or how much they pay him, or how loud he yells, the white media still can't buy him respect. And he realizes no one else wants to give it to him either. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Fatis Mokhtar, Justin Marcus, Eric Bailey, Nadoro Emblem, and Terry White. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.